So as you mentioned, my name is Lara Sucheston-Campbell. I'm an associate professor at Ohio State University, and I just moved here in 2016. And I'm in the College of Pharmacy and the College of Veterinary Medicine. I'm not a pharmacist, and I'm not a vet. So that's an interesting one. I have 7 cats, don't judge. But not a pharmacist or a vet. So I'm going to talk about building a working farm, planning for a successful analytics team and culture. And so with the whole idea of farming, the background, and then also some hard-won lessons along the way, and some ones that I got good advice on, so they didn't have to be quite as hard-won. So I'm hoping that this will be a useful tool for you, and you get maybe 1 to 2 useful points out of it. So just briefly, we're going to talk about, I'm going to list some resources that I used to do this, because bizarrely, getting a PhD in genetic and molecular epidemiology is not like getting a PhD in management sciences. They're actually quite opposite. And so building a team is not sort of this intuitive thing that happens when you're getting your PhD. Yes, at all. And I'm talking about creating your team and then actually maintaining a culture where people want to stay, or at least they don't want to leave quickly. So just briefly, I'm an engineer. I have a master's in operations research, and then I turned into doing genetics. I also have some other random undergraduate degrees, so that my path was a little winding. What that means as a genetic epidemiologist is I'm focused on finding and identifying genes that are related to cancer susceptibility or outcomes. So that's me in a nutshell. I moved from Buffalo, New York, where it really snows, to here in 2016. And so I have 2 kind of big studies that I do. One is focused, as I mentioned, on finding genes associated with myeloid malignancies. So one of the big problems is that it's a deadly disease, and the 5-year survival rate for acute myelogenous or myeloid leukemia is about 27%. It's not as common. People don't have a lot of cases, so we created this worldwide consortium, and right now we have 6,000 or 7,000 cases, and we're looking at susceptibility for those. And the second one, as I mentioned, I'm interested in outcomes. So folks who get leukemia get treated with a blood or marrow transplant. Sometimes that doesn't go as well as we would like, and it has a higher death rate than we would like for treatment. So we're trying to look at genetics to try and figure out if there are genes outside what we kind of already know that are related to outcomes after transplant. And so that's called Discovery BMT, determining the influence of susceptibility conveying variants related to 1-year survival after blood and marrow transplant. That literally took as long to come up with as the analyses. So painful. So that's enough about me. So you graduate, you get a PhD. Congratulations, you have a PhD, or you get a master's degree in engineering or statistics or computational sciences, whatever kind of flavor you're pursuing. And then you get, here's some or a lot of money. You get a startup package, or you get charged with, here's what we have, your budget to create a team, and then let's go. So about 3 months ago or 2 months ago, you were a student or a postdoc, and now you have to build a team. The only interview thing you've ever done is the 2 interviews you've had for your postdoc or your position. So that's a little bit interesting that you have to build a team from scratch, or maybe you built a team in an entirely different field. So that's what I'm going to kind of talk about today. So I'm a little nervous. I'm not going to lie. There are no data in this talk. I have no data, no statistics, no cool GG plots or R graphics. I'm not talking about my research. I'm talking about how I'm going, how I do my research. So that's a really different thing. But I did go about building my team in kind of an analytical way. So I thought, I didn't get a PhD in this. Other people have PhDs in this. Let's use that information. So I had cocktail conversations with senior female scientists. Being the head of a data team as a woman, particularly in academia, is a different thing. And then I looked at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. HHMI investigators are very, very distinguished folks in the field of science, and they had a practical guide to scientific management for postdocs and new faculty. So I thought, great, I'm new faculty, I will pursue this. It's a little bit more geared towards wet lab folks, so that's something I took into account. It's the guide itself is about 300 pages, so that should tell you. But yet, we don't do any of that when we're doing our PhD. It's like how to do this after, it's 300 pages. And then I thought, well, I'm going to look at Google, because Google, they do research, they have teams, they have all different types of teams of people. And so I got this book called Work Rules, which is actually kind of a fun read. I can recommend it. And this is from the former senior vice president of people operations at Google. And then they have this website called RE Work, which is an effort by Google to help with practices. So I thought, I'm going to use these. I'm going to use this information from people to do this. And then, of course, as a good data scientist, I put it through a filter. Because there's a lot of information, so there's appropriate filtering. And the filters that I used to create my team using this information were team size. I'm not a Howard Hughes medical investigator. That's not happening for me. So I'm not a head of a large department at Google. I have 6 or 7 people. So that's very different than 25. That's different than 30. That's different than 2, right? Dry lab appropriate. As I mentioned, the Howard Hughes medical investigators, incredibly prestigious folks, but they do a lot of wet lab stuff. No one is pipetting in my lab. So that's something else to think about in terms of like resources and who you're hiring. Money. I don't work at Google, so like we can leave it at that, right? Yeah. Practical implementations. Like some of the suggestions were, that's great, but I can't provide trips to Hawaii as incentive, so that's not happening. And then lastly, reality. Just, that whole, okay, how am I going to actually recruit people? Where do we live geographically? Just some of those things to think about. Okay, so that was what I used to create Team Sucheston-Campbell, which is my last name. And so let's just, before we go forward with talking about the team, let's jump back to the idea of what a team is. And if you're bored already, you can leave after this slide because most of the information is contained in here. So these are people, include it's not person, people, plural, who work together in a committed way. Let's do that as a positive statement. To achieve a common goal or mission. And the work is interdependent. It is not siloed. I should have underlined interdependent. The team members sharing is good, responsibility, and they hold themselves accountable for attaining results. I like this definition. I looked at a lot of definitions of team. So I like this for all the pieces and parts that it has in it. So as promised, the great farm reveal, there's a lot of pressure with that. All right, so why do I like this analogy? I like this analogy because it's a little more, as engineers, we really like Gantt charts and timed things and organized stuff. And why I didn't exactly go into engineering was because that didn't quite describe my personality. So harvest. Oftentimes there's sort of 4 phases in farming. By the way, I've never been on a farm. I mean, maybe once. But I like this because I think about it this way. I like it because graphically you can kind of see, all right, these pieces all fit together on the same plot of land. We can think about them in different phases. So harvest, this is getting the fruits of your research. You're cranking out papers, you're making tables. This is also, we need to do this analysis urgently. Get it done now. I mean, I appreciate that is not how we like to do analyses in good analyses in an urgent way. Don't always go together, but so we spend time doing this. And maybe a lot of time, maybe that's the part of your data team you're creating, that's what they're doing. But it's also important to spend time thinking about growing your research or your plot of land to be able to harvest it. Here it is. Excellent. Okay. And then we can think about planting, and this is the part where you have an idea, and maybe you have a little bit of money to do the idea, and you're starting to do this. And then planting. And these are your pie in the sky, your lilac fields, your tiny little plot in the corner where you're like, maybe this will work. And I like that these are on a continuum, and you can think about moving back and forth between them. So that's one of the reasons I like this analogy, is that it's visual, it involves timing, and involves stages of research. So it's easy to visualize and plan over time. The overall mission is implemented through a series of smaller and larger projects. Obviously, you have different pieces. This is a great framework for presenting your research or your team's research. I say this because I've had success in interviewing with this. I've had success presenting it this way because you can do it in pieces and stages. And it sort of makes sense to people even if they've never been on a farm. And the growth happens through permutations of set resources. So you have your group, they have set resources, and that's what you're using to create them. And it also allows you, when you're plotting it out, to think about, okay, I have these 6 people. How can I arrange them at time-wise to treat various pieces and parts of my whole farm, from the planning to the harvesting? And economics, so just the study of the allocation of scarce resources. Resources are always, well, in academia they feel like they're always scarce. So you're always kind of working to figure out how to maximally allocate those, and people, time, whatever that is. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about is developing a clear vision. And this was a recommendation of the HHMI investigators. And this is an interesting thing for an academic lab. And I appreciate that companies, departments, divisions have visions, but your data science team, this is a thing. So this is a thing to think about doing, and I'm going to kind of march through why. A shared team vision, it doesn't prohibit innovation, and the vision statement provides a foundation to grow. So what does that look like? My vision is that we'll leverage genetics to identify individuals with hematologic malignancies and then significantly impact survival. That is a pretty big ask. That's like a career vision. I look at that and think, wow, really? That's a thing. But I think it's important for your group to have a vision as to what they're doing. It's because it sort of keeps your eye on the prize, right? This larger overarching vision. But in reality, like, okay, great, how are you going to implement that? And that's lovely. So that's why implementing it with a mission statement. And I know this seems very like, well, obviously your organization has a mission statement. But oftentimes research groups, they're charged with doing something and working on something, but they don't actually have a mission statement as to what they're doing. And there's some guidelines for doing this, and these are taken, again, from the HHMI. And what I sort of did was I went back and forth through scientific recommendations and actual like working group recommendations like Google to see if, all right, are they saying, if they did research on this, is this actually providing a decent outcome? So everything that I'm presenting here today are things that I do in my lab, and they're suggestions I have, and then research has shown they're a good idea. So I'm going to present some of those articles and references, but everything I'm talking about here today is a reasonable suggestion and has been shown to be successful. So it's not just things I'm making up that this seems like a great idea, but it is actually true. It provides a reason and emotional justification. I thought this was interesting that they said this. So when I was doing my mission statement for my lab, one of the things that I passionately believe in is training the next generation of scientists, which I know sounds a little bit hokey, but that's sort of what we're charged with. But I really buy into that. I really buy into having PhD students, training them, making sure they get good postdocs and jobs, and they have proper training, and they go give talks, and they write abstracts, and they publish. And so that's I don't have to do that as part of my job. I mean, they kind of raise an eyebrow if I did, but that's something I really buy into, so that's included. And then tying it together, you can't be you can't have values that totally differ from your company. That's sort of a no-brainer. Be clear and honest. Be honest, especially the emotional and reason part. Be honest with what you want to do. So this is where you shouldn't be afraid to say, yeah, I know everybody else is going after this. I want to be the best lab in the world that does this. Okay, but maybe that's not exactly what you want to do. Maybe you want to serve people in a different way. And then distinguish yourself from competitors, which I thought this was interesting because in academia we do have competitors. We sort of think of them that way, but we don't necessarily say that word out loud. So in industry, I'm guessing you maybe say that a lot, but that's distinguish yourself from people that you know are doing the same thing and in the same field. Okay, so as promised, this is not just nonsense that I've made up that sounds good. This is actually proven to work. And yes, team members, so those are the references down at the bottom. These two folks do a lot of research in management, PhDs at Yale, and I forget where the guy is from, but the woman Brzezinski works at Yale. And team members who are inspired have increased productivity and happiness. And if you can reformulate tasks to show people hey, they're good, they're helping people, they'll be happier with their work. So indeed, having a mission statement does result in good outcome for your workers. And so let's talk about getting those folks, getting those workers. This is something I passionately believe in, along with, which I just said, I believe in training people. Hire people better than you at something. If you leave with nothing else today, hire people better than you at something. Case in point, my PhD student is presenting today at 4 o'clock on how to use R. Literally, I'm pretty sure the only reason I got an invitation to do this is because she's speaking. It's my PhD student. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my sad PI needs. Yeah. So and my other PhD student's data. He created a data visualization, and that's part of the data viz competition. Hire people better than you at something. The only thing that I can offer them, aside from paying them and buying pizza occasionally, and taking them on trips when they present stuff, is experience. I'm older, and so I can offer them a lot of experience about doing science, thinking about science. I've also gotten pretty good at troubleshooting and looking at something and saying that's horribly wrong and we need to look at that again. But they have young brains. They're creative. They're really good at coding. And I will say, I'll speak a minute on a bad hire. They're terribly toxic. So that's not the greatest thing ever, and they'll poison your lab. So set the bar high, don't compromise, and be willing to wait. I recently hired a postdoc who, by all points, this individual seemed as though he would succeed in my lab by looking at publications, references. He gave a job talk. And so everything looked like he would, and he didn't. He drained my lab of resources. My PhD students had to help him because what he said he could do, he couldn't, and the people who wrote his references thought he worked on a different piece than he did. So I'll talk about what I put in place in interviewing going forward to avoid that happening again, because that probably cost me, in addition to his salary for about 7 or 8 months, everybody else's time, so I'm guessing close to $70,000 or $80,000, which is a lot of money, and even more so, it's a lot of time. It's a lot of research time. So, how to hire this person? So, I have had lots of success. Well, I've had 5 people of success. I'm 5 for 6, so I feel like, all right, that's not that great, but it's not that bad. All right, how to hire people? Give people a reason to join your group. The mission thing is like, hey, we're going to do this. All right, that is an easy goal It is an easy goal in cancer. Like, who isn't like, yeah, I want to do cancer research? It's not. But reframing, as I gave the example before, reframing things as though you're doing something meaningful to help people. That's a reasonable thing. Everyone recruits. Okay, let's say you have one person that you have with you. That person is going to help you recruit. Talk to them. Talk to other people. So that has to be an active part of it. Take a risk, and this is something that has worked quite well for me. Again, I have a small sample size, so being data people, I don't know, take that for what it's worth. Look outside your field. So especially data science is at this and particularly doing mathematical and statistical genetics or genomics, it's a mix of a bunch of different fields. Not everybody can have all of the skills. I mean, if you find that person, pay them whatever they want. But basically, that's not happening. So take a risk. So the computer scientist or physicist who's interested in, for example, for me, I can only give examples for myself here. Bioinformatics, if they're really dedicated, if they have what we heard was grit or chutzpah or whatever you want to call it, and they don't have a strong biology background, but they're willing to do that, that's a reasonable thing. Or someone with molecular biology, my 2 PhD students have a molecular biology background and they got into coding. So I'm saying this doesn't always work, which is why it's in orange, proceed with caution. But I think that this is a reasonable approach to trying to find people, is that just thinking outside the box and not always just going through a CV or a resume and saying, nope, they don't have this, nope, they don't have that. Being willing to consider other aspects. The curious, I mean, I guess this would fall into what we call grit, but the curious are always fantastic. And I have the journal club and chalk talk in yellow because that's such an important thing. So what we did for the most recent interview in my lab was they sat through a journal club. So one of the students, every Tuesday we had a journal club, or every other Tuesday, and they present a research article very informally, nothing nothing serious with slides. I mean, there are 6 people. But, yeah. So we sit around and we chat about the article, and you really hear how people think. So having something like this to discuss an article, I realize that's an academic thing, but there's a lot of white papers, whatever it is you want to talk about, that's available. The Chalk Talk is another one. I know they're called Chalk Talks in the ancient world of academia, but they're whiteboard chats. They're putting their ideas up, having a conversation about, well, here's your research now, and here's what you're doing now. What do you think you could do with this person? What do you think you can do with this person? So that's another way we kind of find out what they're thinking. And that's never with a really big group of people. That's always with the people that are going to be with the rest of the team, and maybe with the rest of the, like a group if you're part of a larger group, because you really want to be able to, it's not just another research presentation, it's a Chalk Talk. You want to be able to interact. It's a very, very informal. And long-term incentives. So I'm a big fan of these. I do like to hire folks. I right now am very fortunate to have a woman in my lab who is a very, very talented bioinformatician, and she should go on to get a PhD. And I want her to go on to get a PhD, so she has her own projects to write papers that she will have first author papers, and she will probably, sadly, leave my lab in 2 years, and that's okay. So that's great. She knows some people who will be graduating in 2 years or a year, and they'll come on board. And maybe that's the same thing. But those longer term incentives about additional conferences, academic conferences can sometimes be in nice places, So that's a thing depending upon where people are in their career. And those are the type of incentives I can offer. If I worked at Google, again, vacations in Hawaii I could offer, but that's not happening. Okay, so let's return to our definition of a team. A very positive team, functional and effective. This is a functional and effective team. And I want to give a tiny example of what is not a functional and effective team, having been in one of these and having kind of seen one of these, and then maybe how to avoid these. How many folks have heard of the Apollo syndrome? Yeah, so this is an interesting thing. So Apollo 1 was a mission in the late 1960s. That was supposed to launch in 1967, be the first manned mission to Mars. And did I get that right? Yeah. And it went wrong. The best scientists in the world on it, obviously. And unfortunately, there was a tragic cabin fire before they could even do get to low orbit, like a trial, and the 3 astronauts died, and so it wasn't successful despite all this kind of this big hope. So it's a little bit of a dark name, but the Apollo syndrome is a phenomenon by Dr. Meredith Belkin. Is it Belkin? Right. Okay. Which is a man. It took me about 20 minutes of searching to find out. I wondered why they always kept referencing he, and I thought, he's actually a dude. Yeah. I was like, literally, I know about this, syndrome, because I knew I was giving this talk, and I was like, I can't believe this. This is, and I thought, oh, my slide's wrong. No, it's actually that. And so teams of highly competitive individuals selected using these aptitude tests, and they together they are a disaster. And the teams were selected using these ability tests and aptitude tests, and they were considered bound to win, and they were giving a series of trials. They're called Apollo because the mission, this important mission, failed. And it was full of talented folks. But they often finished in doing these tasks near the bottom of the 8 teams. So why is this? So it's all about the culture. So they spent all this time in these destructive debates, kind of pinpointing other people's well, there's a weakness in your argument here. I see some of you smiling, laughing. Yeah, you all know people like this. Yeah. So, just trying to catch you on every little thing when you really want to have a constructive discussion. They had difficulties making decisions, so much so that they couldn't actually complete any job tasks. And they did stuff in silos, resulting in teams that were difficult to manage because it's sort of like herding cats. I can speak to you on this one because I have 7 of them. You kind of run around like this one's doing this, and then all of a sudden you go over to get those 2 together, and those 2 are off doing whatever. So yeah, it's resulted in having really difficulty in doing things. And then even worse, teams recognized what was happening, and they couldn't get out of free fall. They couldn't figure out how to fix this. So they would overcompensate by not saying things when things were going horribly wrong. So, and sometimes we do that. We're a little bit quiet about it, but this is their reaction to the fact that this is such a dysfunctional environment. So, what do we learn from this? How a team works matters more than who is on the team. That was the result of Google's research, and that was the result of lots of Google's research said who's on the team matters more than who is. How a team works together matters more than who's on the team. But again, that's Google. Everyone there is like up here, right? So that's who's included. So I would say it matters as much. Your team culture and environment. You have the smartest people, and they just can't get stuff done because they're cutting each other down, they're undermining each other, they're always trying to look for a way to prove that their idea is better, and always trying to convince somebody else. So now we've seen what an example that you don't want to do. So what do you want to do to create an environment where these folks that you've ideally hired and are pulling together actually work well? So this is modified from what this Project Aristotle, which I have all the references in the back, which you can look up, and this is my interpretation of it. And I want to talk about this bottom one because good science doesn't get done without it, and I think good research in general and good problem solving doesn't get done without, I know it sounds kind of fuzzy, which is a little weird for me to, again, give a little bit of a fuzzy talk. Team members feel safe taking risks and being vulnerable in front of each other. Just remember, someone once said in a meeting, let's make a film about a tornado of sharks. Do you guys know Sharknado? Yeah. Let's not just make one, let's make 6. 6 Sharknado movies. So they have the meeting again, and they're like, yeah, let's make a sequel. And then there's other pieces, dependability. I put this in a pyramid because I think everything kind of rests on this. If people can't communicate and feel safe, then you can't get big ideas done. That is not happening. Clarity and structure, we talked about that, right? Everybody has a role and everybody understands the role. We talked about that in terms of having a mission statement for stuff. And then the meaning, it's having believing the mission statement, and then the impact, believing that they're going to have impact. So I feel like the top ones are really tied to having your mission statement and sharing that and having people buy into that. All right, so making your team safe. Let's make a Sharknado part 6. So the first one, it's a good suggestion. I don't actively practice it because I'm probably not a seasoned enough team leader to do it, if I'm honest. Framing it as a learning problem or to learn from this, because oftentimes it's like, no, we've got to do this. I ideally like to frame everything as a learning opportunity. Maybe in 10 years I'll be a seasoned enough scientist to do that. I can't do that now. You should. There's lots of literature on the advantages of doing that.